Welcome everyone to the Psychology Department's 15th Annual Data Blitz. We have these great presenters that will be bombarding us with data. So we have Jacob Hubers, Hannah Lesnick, McKenna Morgan, Makenzie Peterson, Aaron Madison, Lillie Camp, and Alvarado. So we are going to start with Jacob. They will be sharing their screens with you one at a time. And then we'll just end with Alam. I have to leave 15 minutes before the end to go teach my class. So Mona will be kind of giving you a farewell at the end there. So Jacob, if you're ready to go, I will stop sharing my screen and we'll go from that point.
So hello everybody, and thank you for coming to my presentation. Today I'm going to be talking about the role of anchoring on personality judgment. So to start, I want to talk about a couple of key terms and ideas. The first is going to be personality traits, and these are patterns of characteristic thoughts and behaviors that are used to kind of define personality. And specifically, I'm going to be looking at the Big Five personality traits, or BFI. This is a pretty common measurement used in personality psychology, and it includes traits such as openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And so specifically, I am looking at the process of personality judgment, which is making judgments of other individuals. And within this process, there are two types of individuals. There's the target, or the person being judged, and the judge, the person doing the judging of personality. And I wanted to focus on the role of anchoring in this personality judgment process. And anchoring refers to the use or non-use of information in affecting judgments. And this can be either relevant or non-relevant information, but it is the use of information, usually numeric values, in shaping these judgments. And so specifically, I wanted to see what happens if we manipulate the information that we give to judges. So to begin, targets, I used a previous targets data set where they were recorded answering various get-to-know-you questions. This resulted in videos of targets about 2 to 3 minutes in length. Each judge then watched videos for 6 of these targets. And after watching each video, they were given a BFI scale to rate the personality of those targets. However, the type of BFI scale that was used varied based on the group that the judges were in. The first group received a regular BFI 2 scale, where each of the items was mixed in with one another, and they didn't know what traits they were assessing. The second group received an organized list of these items, where they were organized and labeled with the traits that they were assessing. The last group received this organized by trait, as well as were given an anchor reference point, or a normative anchor. This was the average score that individuals tend to score on this scale. So for my first hypothesis was that judgments of personality traits will be closer to the anchor for individuals in the anchor group than for the control or trait groups. My second hypothesis was specific to the trait and anchor group, and it was that judgments for traits that are more difficult to judge, such as open-mindedness and neuroticism, will be closer to the anchor than traits that are easier to judge, such as extroversion. So what did I find in this study? For the first hypothesis, I found no differences between the BFI groups. So as you can see on the figure on the right, there were no significant differences between groups. This shows that manipulating the information within the questionnaire had no significant differences. However, when I looked a little bit closer at the second hypothesis within group 3, I did find significant differences in this distance from anchor variable across different traits. And so when I looked closer at the post hoc comparisons, I found that agreeableness was significantly different from extroversion, openness, and conscientiousness, whereas extroversion was significantly different from conscientiousness, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So what do these differences look like? What are their directions? If we look at this figure here, you can see that extroversion is fairly high on the distance from anchor variable, whereas agreeableness is fairly low on that variable. This means that the judgments that were made for extroversion tended to be further away from the anchor, meaning that they were less likely to be using that anchor. Whereas with agreeableness, the opposite was true. They were more likely to be using that anchor. So why might this have occurred? In regards to the first hypothesis that there weren't any differences between group, this might be because anchoring is less salient than I initially thought. There's been a lot of recent literature that has suggested that the way we're assessing anchoring might need a little improvement and might result in less distinct effects. Additionally, participants might have just paid more attention to the individuating information that was found in the videos rather than the anchors that they were given. Another possibility is one of the limitations of my study that I was just using too homogeneous of a sample. It was fairly white female college students. And so this might have affected some of the judgments that they made. Additionally, judgments could have just been closer to the anchor due to people making judgments closer to the norm by default. One of the future things I want to look at is normative accuracy, or how normative people make their judgments. And so I want to control for this and see if I can actually, if they were actually the result of these normative judgments or what they actually think. And that is everything. So thank you for listening.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Hannah Lesnick, and today I will be presenting on sleep in concussed adolescents. Are executive functions a mediator? Just as a brief overview and introduction, previous research has looked into concussion and whether that has effects on executive functions and sleep in adolescents. And previous research has found concussed adolescents have a decrease in executive functions up to 2 months post-injury, as well as an increase in sleep disturbances. However, there are currently no studies that examine a mediator explaining the relationship between concussions from a sports-related injury and sleep in adolescents, specifically executive functions. So the objectives for the current study was to understand whether recent concussions in adolescents are related to executive functions, and whether executive functions are related to sleep, and then whether executive functions mediate the relationship between recent concussions and sleep in adolescents. For our methods and procedures, data was drawn from a pilot short-term longitudinal study on youth concussion effects, and time one data was analyzed. For our measures, we split the participants up into diagnosed for a concussion and then not diagnosed for a concussion. And for our executive function measure, we examined the SPOR concussion assessment tool, also known as the SCAT-2. And in this measure, it has a few cognitive processing aspects to it, but the main focus was on delayed recall, which that means you're given a group of words, and then after a time of rest or distraction, you are then asked to recall those words that were previously given to you. And then for sleep, we looked at sleep efficiency, which was measured by actigraphy. And then for our participants, we analyzed 120 adolescents, most of whom were male and white with a mean age of around 13 years old. And then for time one, participants completed a general demographics questionnaire, an actigraphy study, as well as they were interviewed for the SCAT-2. And then for our results, we used structured equation modeling to look at the 3 observed variables, and analysis showed delayed recall mediated the relationship between concussion and sleep efficiency. Compared to the non-concussed participants, the concussed participants had a 20% decrease in the expected number of words recalled in the delayed memory task, as well as the 95% ACI for the mediated effect did not contain 0. So we concluded that the mediated effects was significant. And then finally, we did not find a significant relationship between concussion and sleep in sleep efficiency while controlling for delayed recall. And for our discussion, results from this study suggest that adolescents who have been recently concussed may have poor or a decrease in delayed recall, and that high delayed recall may be decreasing sleep efficiency. We cannot find any reasonable explanation of the negative association between delayed recall and sleep efficiency. It may be due to the fact that they were advised by medical professionals to maybe sleep more and rest in bed for recovery. And additionally, we did not find a significant relationship for the direct effect. However, for future research, we hope to examine recent concussion, whether diagnosed or not, as a third variable to see if that is influencing both sleep efficiency and delayed recall. We would like to thank the participants and coaches and parents for taking part of this study, as well as the Office of Research here at ISU for funding this project. So, thank you.
So today I will be talking about cell phones and metacognitive accuracy. My name is McKenna. I've been working on this project with 2 other undergraduates in Dr. Erica Fulton's lab. I'm sure we all have some experience with the ever-present nature of cell phones, but it is still a relatively new technology, so we're still trying to understand the impact that it has on our day-to-day functioning. Previous research done by Ward showed that the mere presence of one's cell phone has an effect on their cognitive functioning, specifically their fluid intelligence and their working memory. But they didn't look at any metacognitive aspects. And so that's what we were interested in examining, metacognitive accuracy with the presence of the cell phone. Metacognitive accuracy is the ability to monitor or the awareness of one's own learning. Specifically, we're interested to see whether one's cell phone salience has detrimental effects on working memory and cognitive inhibition, and then if it would reduce, therefore, their metacognitive accuracy. So far, we've examined the results of about half our participants. Normally we wouldn't do that, but this project was funded by an undergraduate research grant, and so we were expected to present during the summer. During the condition, participants were placed in one of 3 conditions. First, they were asked, in the first condition, they were asked to place their phone on the desk face down in front of them. In the second condition, participants were asked to place their phone in their pocket or in the bag next to them. And in the third condition, we took their phone into another room completely. Participants were then asked to watch a 30-minute lecture, which was on the platypus. And we picked that topic because we wanted it to be a topic that was unfamiliar to most people. Participants were then ask free recall questions about material that was presented in the video. And then they were asked to make predictions about their ability to recognize the correct answers. And then finally, they were asked questions in a multiple choice format. And these questions, the first half of the questions were easy, and the second half of the questions were difficult. Participants also completed the operation span, or the O-span, which measures working memory. They completed a go, no-go task, which measured cognitive inhibition, and they also completed a survey that measured cell phone dependence. So our preliminary results show that people scored higher on the easy questions and lower on the hard questions, but that the differences in their performance was not reflected in their predictions of their scores. We also saw that people were underconfident on the easy questions compared to the hard ones. And we found no effects of the 3 levels of cell phone salience on metamemory or memory. The underconfidence that we saw on the easy questions was unexpected because overconfidence is the norm in meta accuracy. We also saw that people were unaware of how performance varied with question difficulty, whether they were hard or difficult. And so this unawareness translated to the greater underconfidence that we saw with the easy questions. Another explanation could be that the easy questions were presented first, like I said, so they could have been able to adjust to those. The current results that we have suggest that cell phone salience does not affect students' lecture learning abilities, and that cell phones might not be as disruptive as we had previously thought. But the study still is underpowered, and we're continuing to collect data. Another alternative explanation could be that even though we tried to pick a lecture that was as naturalistic and appropriate as possible, participants are still in an experiment, and they might not be as motivated as they would in an actual classroom setting. And so the method may lack ecological validity. And that is all I have.
All right. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Makenzie Peterson, and I am going to be talking to you about my master's thesis, which focused on online relationship social comparisons, singlehood, and well-being. So social comparisons affect our daily lives. There are two types of social comparisons that can be made that we focused on. And those are upward and downward social comparisons. So with an upward social comparison, we compare ourselves to somebody who is perceived as doing better than us. And then in a downward social comparison, we compare ourselves to someone who is perceived as doing worse than us. 72% of adults in the US have at least one social media profile. And so it's really easy for us to make social comparisons online. And it's important for us to understand the effects that these social comparisons have on us. So Mori et al. 2018 looked at how romantic relationship social comparisons affect both relationship quality and well-being. And they found that those who made a downward social comparison typically experienced greater well-being and relationship satisfaction. Goodness, I'm so sorry. Compared to the upward social comparison group. So we decided to replicate and extend Mori et al. By looking at how singles are affected by these comparisons. So singles are often perceived as being worse off than those who are in romantic relationships. Additionally, there's a lack of research on singles, and almost 45% of people 18 and older are classified as being legally single. So it's important for us to have a better understanding of these individuals and the effects of romantic relationship social comparisons. So we hypothesized that compared to those in the upward social comparison condition, participants in the downward social comparison condition will report greater happiness, self-esteem, satisfaction with life, positive affect, and flourishing, and less negative affect. So as I previously said, our study was a replication and extension of Mori et al. We had 177 participants who met the criteria for participation and were included in our analysis. So eligibility criteria included being 18 and older, having a Facebook account, identifying as single, and identifying as heterosexual. So if participants met all of the inclusion criteria, then they were randomly assigned to either an upward or a downward social comparison Facebook profile set. This profile set featured a male and a female couple, and participants were able to navigate between the profiles. They were able to view the photos that the couple had posted, look at the different posts that were on their timeline, and look at their about section. So after viewing these profiles, participants completed measures of well-being, social comparison, social media use, and satisfaction with relationship status. They also completed some attention checks to verify that they thoroughly viewed the Facebook profiles that they were assigned to. So here's some examples of what we would have seen on those Facebook profiles. These are not real individuals, they're a pretend couple. But for the upward social comparison profile, which is on the left-hand side, this would feature things like positive interactions between or about the couple, such as making plans for the future. It would also feature photos of the couple. And then in the downward social comparison condition, this profile set would feature negative interactions between the couple or about the couple, such as canceling plans. It would also feature pictures of each member of the partnership with potential alternative partners. So we used independent samples t-tests to analyze our data. The results of our study showed that there was a significant difference in the scores for the upward social comparison condition and the downward social comparison condition. So this showed that our manipulation worked. However, it appears that the manipulation did not have a significant effect on our well-being measures like we hypothesized. And there's many reasons that this could have occurred. We were attempting to replicate these really small effects that were found in Mori et al. And some of our analyses ended up being underpowered due to missing data. So it might just be that our sample size was a little bit too small to detect some of these effects. So to our knowledge, this study is the first to be able to replicate the protocol of Mori et al. 2018 in a fully online experiment. And this is exciting because it allows participants to engage in this study in a more natural setting, whereas the original study had people actually come into the lab and look at these profiles. So we did hypothesize that those who were in the downward social comparison group would report greater well-being in comparison to those in the upward social comparison group. Our hypothesis was not supported. It might be that singles may not be able to compare themselves to someone who is in a romantic relationship. They might just be too different from one another for these comparisons to affect them. Additionally, the lack of finding differences in well-being suggests that singles might not be negatively affected by social comparisons to couples, and that would be a good thing. So when looking towards future directions, we know that social comparisons are less strong when they're made to strangers, since these were fake Facebook profiles. These individuals who are participating in our study did not know the couple. So future studies might want to attempt to look at social comparisons among singles to close others who are in romantic relationships. Additionally, our profiles may not have seemed as authentic as we thought they seemed. About a third of our participants said that they did not relate to the couple. And so it might have been that they just did not feel like they connected with them or that they were similar at all. So future researchers should attempt to make these profiles more authentic so that participants might be able to relate to them a bit more. And then lastly, there are certain forms of social media like Instagram or Snapchat that are more popular with young people than Facebook is. So it might be beneficial for future researchers to look at how these platforms affect social comparisons. And that's it. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lillie, and today I'm going to be presenting some data from my master's thesis. I do want to say really quickly, I hope everybody's having a good day. We're kind of getting in that part of the semester where it's a slump, so I hope that everybody's doing well. So just a quick background. So poverty can be described as receiving or earning insufficient income to pay for daily living necessities. And some examples of these daily living necessities are things like food, water, shelter, and clothing. And this basically means that these individuals are living at an economic level in which they aren't able to afford their basic human needs. So these needs are not met. Poverty is often described as cyclical and having a generational nature, and that those who are born into poverty have harder times escaping it later in life. Also, past research has shown that children who grow up in poor families are more likely to find themselves poor in early adulthood, and the chances of being poor in early adulthood sharply increase as the amount of time spent living in poverty as a child increases. In 2019, the United States Census Bureau quoted the poverty rate at about 10.5%, which is a pretty staggering number. So given all of this information, it's really important that we start to examine some factors that might maintain this poverty cycle. And one of these is a sensitivity to delay. So we can measure sensitivity to delay through a couple of behavioral economics procedures. The first being delayed discounting, which within this program, I'm sure you guys have heard a lot of. So delayed discounting can be described as the devaluing of a reward based upon a delay in its receipt. And when human participants complete delayed discounting tasks, they're presented with a series of choices, often hypothetical. And so an example of one question would be, would you prefer $24 right now or $55 in 10 days? Probability discounting is similar, but a little different. It is the devaluing of a reward based upon a probability in its receipt. And similarly, individuals are presented with series of choices between a smaller for sure amount and then a larger probabilistic amount. So an example of one of these questions would be, would you prefer $24 for sure or have a 90% chance of winning $55? So the current study sought to examine how perceptions of financial security affect choice behaviors. Previous literature has shown negative correlations between income and delayed and probability discounting. However, these were all correlational studies, and it's really important that we're able to also experimentally examine how feelings of financial security or insecurity affect the choices that one is making. So this study was conducted through Amazon's MTurk, which is a crowdsourcing marketplace where you can just put surveys up and have wide varieties of people complete it for compensation. Upon being in the study, they were randomly assigned into either a financially secure or financially insecure group in which feelings of that financial security or insecurity were induced using manipulations, which we'll get into in 1 second. They then went through some self-report measures, including basic demographics, and then some measures of substance use. And then they did the behavioral measures, so delay and probability discounting. So we manipulated feelings of financial security. What we see here is what somebody in the financially secure group would have seen. So first they see the scale in which they were asked to report their monthly income, and the scale went from 0 to 2,000 or more. Research indicates that those whose income is near the top of the scale tend to be more satisfied with their finances than those whose income falls near the bottom of the scale, even if the absolute amount of income is the same. So they're kind of making perceptions about their financial security based on where they fall on the scale. So with this scale, we were hoping that most people would be falling in that upper range and making implications about financial security accordingly. Just to really hit home this manipulation, we then gave them a quick little kind of blurb saying, we compared you with other people, but we didn't. This was all randomly assigned. And then we asked them to take a minute to write about how it feels to be financially adequate. So just more induction of these feelings. Those in the financially insecure group were exposed to this scale, so reporting monthly income again, but on a much larger range, so $0 to $50,000 or more. So our hope was most people were falling in the very, very bottom range and making implications about that. Similarly, they were asked to think about how it feels to be relatively inadequate in their financial position, and then write about it. So we had a total of 313 individuals completing the survey through Amazon's MTurk. However, we went through some data screening and exclusion. This was both through some attention checks and also validity checks related to discounting measures in general, the ones used in our study. So we ended up with a total N of 116 participants. 100 of those had valid delayed discounting scores, so those were included, and then about 75 had valid probability discounting scores. So for delayed discounting, an ANCOVA was run to test group mean differences in the delayed discounting scores. We did have a covariate, the SMAST, which is a measure of alcohol use. We saw high correlations between that measure and the delayed discounting scores, so we wanted to make sure that we were just accounting for this. And overall, no significant differences were found between the financially secure and insecure groups in delayed discounting. For probability discounting, our data came out very non-normal. It was actually a bimodal distribution, and knowing the assumptions of ANCOVA, assuming a normal distribution, we were unable to do it. We even tried to transform the data quite a lot, and it just never got to the standards of normality to be able to use an ANCOVA. So we ended up doing a logistic regression in which our dependent variable, those probability discounting scores, were dichotomized according to the mean. So we had a high and low discounting group. We also entered a covariate into this model. This measure was a measure of cigarette dependence. We saw high correlations between the cigarette dependence and probability discounting score. So again, we just want to make sure we were controlling for that. And then as we saw, the logistic regression model was approaching statistical significance at p is equal to 0.055. However, that does not quite meet the cutoff. So we did not see any significant differences or effect. So overall, this study found no significant effect of group assignment on sensitivity to delay or probability, which might mean that feelings of financial insecurity do not affect sensitivity to delay or probability. However, there's a lot to consider, specifically that we were approaching statistical significance with the probability discounting. We had a manipulation check to see if the manipulation truly induced these feelings. And we actually found no significant differences between the two groups when they were rating their satisfaction with their finances, which might indicate that our manipulation itself wasn't effective enough inducing these feelings. Even though past studies have found that, it just might have not been meaningful enough for the population that we had complete our study. Also really prevalent within the department right now is MTurk and data validity concerns, which we definitely had. We tried to use some of these attention checks and validity checks. However, we just had a lot of concerns about the validity of the data. And so this actually leads us to a new project that our lab is currently doing, in which we're examining whether MTurk truly is a valid place to be collecting this discounting data, and then what kind of steps can we put in place to ensure that we're getting valid data. So thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Alam. I'm going to be talking about the relation between COVID-19 restrictions and changes in the reinforcing potency of food and weight gain. So what is COVID-19, quarantine, and restrictions? COVID-19 was a severe acute viral respiratory syndrome that was highly contagious with over 500 million cases and over 6 million deaths worldwide. Quarantine measures such as the stay-at-home orders were used to protect the public and to slow the spread of the virus by restricting interactions of people who were exposed to the virus. During quarantine, many were concerned about a variety of health issues, such as quarantine-related weight gain. So our lab is interested in food consumption and food-related health problems using a behavioral economic lens. Behavioral economics is a theoretical framework applied to health behavior where the potency of a reinforcer is based on how reinforces the activity is in the moment, but also relative to others that are available. Just to clarify, in this study, we focused on the availability of a reinforcer and not the delay. The COVID-19 quarantine was a special context that may have reduced the range of reinforcements available to others. For example, food may have been potentiated as a reinforcer because of the removal of other non-food reinforcers. Other non-food reinforcers would be an example of school lectures, school activities, sports, and spending time with friends. So we had 3 questions. Question 1, to what extent did the 3-month COVID-19 quarantine constrain the range of reinforcements options available? So we hypothesized that the range of reinforcements would decrease during quarantine compared to pre and post-quarantine. Question number 2, to what extent did the 3-month COVID-19 quarantine increase the consumption of food? We hypothesized that the consumption of food would increase during quarantine compared to pre and post-quarantine. And then question number 3, to what extent did the 3-month COVID-19 quarantine predict weight gain? We hypothesized that participants would gain weight during quarantine compared to pre and post-quarantine. So our participants were recruited from Idaho State University via SONA in March 2021. We conducted a power analysis for a total of 51 participants. Participants also retrospectively completed the measures about 1 year after quarantine began. Our independent variables were the 3 time points: pre-quarantine, during quarantine, and post-quarantine. Participants ended up completing the following measure 3 times, once for each time point. So to measure reinforcer range, we used the everyday tasks, which measured the time allocation for 12 specific reinforcers. An example of those reinforcers would be entertainment, school, work, time with family, and time with friends. And then participants would rate those reinforcers, would rate the time of allocation for those reinforcers on a Likert scale from 0 to 6. 0 meaning that there's no time allocation for that reinforcer, and 6 being the most time allocated to those reinforcers. The reinforcers that were rated above 3 were considered reinforcers of importance. We also measured a self-reported food intake and participant weight. So for our analysis, we conducted a repeated measures ANOVA with bond for correction. So first I'm going to be talking about the range of reinforcement, and then I'll talk about the other 2 results. So in this graph, I'm going to explain the x-axis from left to right, starting with pre-quarantine, during quarantine, and post-quarantine. On the y-axis, we have the mean reinforcers rated above 3. So what this graph is showing is that the range of reinforcers dropped to about a 4 during quarantine compared to pre-quarantine, which was at a 6, and post-quarantine, which was at a 5. First, our second result, we're going to talk about the food intake. Once again, on the x-axis from left to right, it's the 3 time points, so pre, during, and post-quarantine. And on the y-axis, we have the average meals per day. So what this graph is showing is that the numbers of self-reported meals increased to about 4.5 during quarantine compared to pre and post-quarantine, which remained out of 4. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the results for weight gain. Once again, on the x-axis from the left to right, we have the 3 time points, pre, during, and post-quarantine. And then on the y-axis, we have participant weight, the average participant weight in pounds. What this graph is showing is that participant weight increased to about 165 pounds during quarantine compared to pre-quarantine, which was about 160 pounds. However, this one was interesting because participants maintained their weight post-quarantine at about 168 pounds. So to summarize, during quarantine compared to pre and post-quarantine, there was a restriction of reinforcements and participants reported eating more meals. However, participants gained weight during quarantine and they maintained it post-quarantine. This supports prior research on quarantine-related weight gain, where weight increased during quarantine and has maintained at that level even after the quarantine has ended. So in conclusion, higher intake of food during quarantine was related to restriction of reinforcement, which supports behavioral economic theories of health behavior. I would like to thank everybody for taking the time to listen to this presentation, and thank you for my lab for all the support as well.
Thank you to all our presenters, and thank you all for attending today's Data Blitz. And we look forward to seeing you next year for our future Data Blitz.